what's printed in the bulletin. It's not a foreign language, and it's not some new slang term as far as I know. I'm going to leave you pondering that for a little bit and look at what Isaiah has to say for us today. Because the picture is beautiful, encouraging, and so opposite of what we see in this life. Isaiah pictures a heavenly feast. In fact, as you keep reading, the scene can only be fulfilled in heaven. The best of food and wine, but even more than that, the Lord will take care of death itself and wipe the tears away from all of his people. Now, we're coming up on Thanksgiving at the end of the month, and so maybe this gets your mouth kind of watering at all the good things to come. Isn't that part of the point of these words? Doesn't God want our mouths watering for eternity? Why? Because that helps with the anticipation. It helps provide encouragement in the midst of the struggles. He wants us hungering in anticipation for the time when everything wrong will be righted, for the time when he'll restore the perfection of Eden, for the time when there won't be sadness, mourning, grief, pain. But that time is not right now. What's going on in your life that has you asking, what's going on, Lord? Or maybe you don't have anything going on now, but there's someone around you that does, and could be just be people affected by the recent hurricanes. You know anyone affected by them? I know at least a few people affected in those different areas. It's easy with a news cycle to forget it and move on. I can guarantee the people in Asheville, North Carolina have not yet forgotten and are not yet moving on, nor will they for a long time. Or what is it in your life that has you wondering, have you forgotten me, Lord? Are you not going to keep your promises? I guess this is where our often shallow understanding of trust hurts us. Do you know that you can only trust in situations where there's the danger of your trust being broken? It's kind of important to understand. So, you can think about the stereotypical trust test, where there's one person that's supposed to fall backwards and the other person catches them. Have you ever been in that situation, falling backwards, how hard it is to not try to catch yourself? To completely trust that someone else will catch you? And the temptation, if you're the person catching someone, to just play a practical joke this time. That'd be funny, right? Yeah. Trusting God is the same, isn't it? Although we often don't think about it that way. Trusting God's all about eternity, which means it isn't focused on right now. That's what so many Americans get wrong about faith. So when Isaiah says we trusted in him and he saved us, he's looking back on what's already happened. But again, remember, this picture is in eternity. So he's in eternity looking back on what has happened. And that changes our perspective. See, it isn't that God is going to give us what we want or the good life right now, but he will in eternity. And that kind of ties in with people often misunderstand what Romans 8:28 is all about. You may have heard that one before. We know that in all things God works for the good of those who love him, who've been called according to his purpose. Okay? And by the way, I really urge you caution about using that when someone's going through tragedy or trauma or something, because you know what they'll throw back at you sometimes legitimately? Oh yeah, I'd like to see God do that. Right? They're emotional. It's not the time for something you got to walk through and logically explain to someone, right? It's a time to hear out the emotions. But what is that promise really getting at? It's from the perspective of eternity looking back that we know that in all things God uses all things for the good of those who love him, right? It's not from the perspective of right here and now. That's from the perspective of eternity. Okay? I guess I want to ask people with a few years under your belts, think back to a challenging time in your life. If you could go back and change that, would you? The temptation might be, yeah, right away. I'd go change that. But think about how that challenge shaped you as a person. Think about the lessons you learned from that. Maybe even how it changed your approach to life. And when you look back on it, I can think of a few, more than a few in my life. As hard as they were, I'm not so sure I would change them. They kind of shape you as a person. And not only that, they kind of prepare you for other struggles you've gone through. And if you take that one away, you wouldn't have been prepared for others in the same way that you were. Right? Now, if there is something traumatic, you may still change it. And yet I've read or spoken with many people who have gone through trauma and wouldn't go back and change it because of how it's shaped them into the person they are now. Have you figured out the theme yet? If you read it normally, it makes no sense. It's gobbledygook. If you start at the end and read backwards, you find 3 different words. God is love. Too often in our lives, we try to understand them looking forward. And we miss the simple perspective that we need to hear a lot of God's promises as looking back from the perspective of eternity into the present. You got to look at it from the end. And that perspective changes everything. Now, we have some of the craziest consumer days coming up. You got Black Friday at the end of the month and then Cyber Monday, right? I don't know how much shopaholics you guys are, but would you go to the assembly line and ask for a vehicle that was halfway finished? It'd be crazy, right? Or would you take an iPhone before they put the screen on? I mean, you slice your fingers trying to swipe left or right on the circuits underneath, right? Okay. Who would want a half-finished product? Then why do we try to so often judge our lives halfway through? Because we do, don't we? Why, God? Why would you let this, that, or the other thing happen? Isn't that the same thing? Your life isn't done yet. It's trying to judge from the perspective of right now instead of from the perspective of eternity, looking back over everything. It's the end product that God is concerned about, isn't it? Now, you can even look at this from a more earthly perspective. There's some interesting illustrations I came across recently. Anyone know the name Grandma Moses? Okay, maybe not. She was a famous, couple. A painter. And got really recognized for some of her paintings on the front cover of Time magazine and whatnot. Do you know how old she was when she started painting? 78. I'm sure you've heard the name Colonel Sanders, right? Started KFC. Do you know how old he was when he started the very first KFC restaurant? 72. Crazy, right? People that most would look at and say they're nearing the end of their lives and yet continue to use the gifts God gave them. We're not done. God is not done with us until the end comes. And the end is our eternity with Him. The end is heaven. So please don't try to judge God halfway through the book of your life. Please don't give up and leave halfway through the movie or think that you know it all. This takes trust. And this is one of the reasons why knowing your Bible is so important. Because it's not just you and me that feel this way. Others have too. I mean, Abraham, how long did God make him wait for the promise of that son to be kept? 25 long years from the age of 75 to 100. In fact, so long that the book of Hebrews said his body was as good as dead. How would you like that written about you? And then God comes and keeps his promise. And by the way, ironically, that son of the promise, Isaac, when he got married to Rebekah, they had to wait 20 years before God blessed them with children. What was God doing during that 25 and 20-year period except molding and shaping and training them to trust God even more than they trust their eyes, even more than they trust what's going on in their lives? what is God doing in your life? We often look at challenges as, why would a loving God let that happen, right? That's the American way of looking at challenges, right? We need to change that and recognize that's so naive. If we really want to take such a naive perspective, I mean, look at parenting. Do parents prevent their kids from ever walking because they're terrified they might get hurt? Let alone running, learning how to use a knife, driving? Well, sometimes you might like to, but I think we all know that would cripple them for life, wouldn't it? And yet, to the degree that we see more and more helicopter parents in our world, does it shock us that so many people take that to God's parenting? Just like they helicopter parent their kids, they want God to helicopter parent their life. They don't want anything bad to ever happen. We live in a sinful world. Other people do sinful things. I do sinful things. You do sinful things. And somehow, some of those are going to have consequences and cause hardship for me and you. God directs our eyes to a different perspective, one from eternity, looking back on all of this. And only then will we understand how God's working through everything. It's really kind of like good literature. For a good story, the author is constantly weaving crucial plot points early on in the story. And yet sometimes you're just wondering, how does that fit in? And it's only when you finally get to the end, you're just amazed how the author tied everything all together and tied it up in a neat bow. Isn't that what God is saying with each of our lives? You're part of the story. God is the master storyteller, and it's only at the end that we'll see how it all fits together to not give us just a good life right now, but to bring us and the elect home to God in heaven. See, if you keep trying to figure out your life right now, you'll end up with gobbledygook like a Volkswagen, whatever that is. It's only when you look backwards from the end onto your life right now, you can see how God is love and how he's done everything for our salvation, continues to work so that one day we may see the truths of these words in eternity. Change your perspective. Look from the end back. And that's how we see how God truly is love and works through all things for the good of those who love him, to draw us closer to him and to bring us home one day to him in heaven. Amen.